Today, I'm going to be showing you how to paint a realistic cat eye step by step. Now, this YouTube video is a shortened, compressed version of the full-length 3-hour tutorial. But here's the cool thing. It's completely free. So if you want access to the full 3-hour tutorial, complete with a palette cam and my voice walking you through every moment, go sign up at the link in the description of this video. This full-length tutorial is also a great snapshot of the kinds of things that you're going to find inside my painting membership, the Wildlife Painting Academy. There are over 50 tutorials inside, plus a ton of other powerful resources for artists that are designed to help you to learn to create realistic animal paintings fast. All right, let's jump in. So first things first, I am going to try to get my sketch onto my canvas here. My favorite way to do this is by printing off my sketch and transferring it to my surface with transfer paper. There's a couple different ways that you can do this, but I find this is just the most efficient way to do so. So all you got to do is put a piece of transfer paper below your sketch over your surface, draw over the lines, and you're good to go. And the next step, this is personal preference, is I don't like working on a white canvas, so I'm going to go in with a little blob of acrylic paint, and I'm just basically going to tint the surface of my canvas here to have a nice warm brown. You can still see all the lines through it, but it's just going to make it so much easier for you to work through. And finally, I'm mixing up a bit of a palette here that I can use to get started with. I'm working with oils, but you can definitely get the same effect with acrylics. I worked exclusively with acrylics for years before I moved to oils, so with just a few small changes in mediums, you can definitely get the same effect with acrylics. All right, and now is time to actually start painting. So I'm going in here and I'm starting off by mapping out the darkest parts of my painting first. This is always how I like to start because I find that it prevents you from having contrast issues down the road. And it's also just going to act as a really nice sort of map for you to start building out the rest of your painting. I like to go in with pretty large brushes at this point because in or underpainting, you're not focusing on detail at this point and really even thinking about color all that much. We are going to be painting a blue cat eye here, so I definitely do want to think a little bit about color, but I know that once I move into my glazing phase, which is way down the road, I'm going to be able to build in all these really great color shifts. So for the most part, underpainting, you are focusing on your values. So forget about detail, forget about color for now. So now that I have the darkest parts of my painting in, I'm starting to move through the rest of the colors that I mixed up on my palette, going lighter as I move through. So you're starting to see how there's going to be some light bouncing around in this eye. The top portion of the eye is going to be shadowed, right? So this eyeball is going to be sunk into the head. So the eyelid is going to be casting a shadow over the eye. Hence why you're going to have that really deep, dark, beautiful blue on top that's going to be in shadow. And then the lower portion of your iris is going to be having a lot more light hit it. So that's where we can go in with these really beautiful, lighter blues. So now that I have this first layer in, I'm just grabbing a soft, dry brush and I'm just slightly blending out some of my wet paint here. If you're working with acrylics, you know how quickly they dry, so you might have to work in smaller sections to be able to do this part. But if you're working with oils, your paint should definitely still be wet at this point. So go ahead and grab a nice, soft, dry brush and just kind of blend out that paint you've put down on your surface to make things look nice and soft. So now that I'm pretty content with how the iris of our eye is looking here, for now anyways, I'm going to start to move into the fur. So I'm going to follow the same sort of structure that I did with the eye. I'm starting with my darker colors first, not thinking about detail at this point, not even really thinking about that much color, really focusing on building up solid values. And if you focus on this first in your underpainting, it's going to make the rest of your painting so much easier. I'm also choosing to use larger brushes here because, again, I know I'm not focusing on detail at this point. Working with larger brushes not only helps you to paint more quickly, so you can progress more quickly, But when you're working with those large brushes, it also prevents you from jumping into detail prematurely. Because I know detail is a lot of fun. And sometimes you need to build in these little tricks to prevent you from jumping in too early with your detail. Because if you do detail too early, you might end up with a weak painting because you don't have that structure built in yet that's going to result in a strong painting. So do yourself a favor, forget about detail this early on, and then work on your detail once your solid underpainting with your great values are locked in place. So now that I have all sorts of colors locked in here, I'm going to do the same sort of blending technique that I did with the iris. I'm grabbing a large soft brush here, and I'm just kind of lightly running it over the surface of my painting. I'm aiming to kind of blend out some of these brush strokes, but I'm not going to blend everything into oblivion. I want to maintain the hard work we just put into things, but I just kind of want to create a bit more of a soft fur effect. So I want some of the fur to be a little bit darker, so I'm going back in here with some really dark paint and just strengthening some of the shadows a little bit more, just to make sure that I have a really good balance of my lights and my darks, because ultimately this is what's going to help you to create a really solid painting. So I'm just going in with teeny tiny little brush strokes here, starting to kind of build up a little bit of detail here, but really not going into too much yet because we're not fully into our detail phase yet. We're just starting to build it up. So again, now starting to build up a little bit more texture in our fur. So I'm just using still a pretty large brush because I'm just starting to build up detail. And I know that I'm going to be moving to smaller brushes as I start to move through to my lighter colors, which you can see I'm doing here. But I always want to make sure that I'm working with the largest brush possible because it's just going to help you to progress more quickly for your painting. And until I start getting into that really, really tight detail, I'm not really working with small brushes yet. Filbert brushes are my favorite size because they're just so versatile. You've got that sort of broad side that you can work with, that you can cover large areas, you can blend really nicely with. And then if you turn your brush 90 degrees, it gives you that nice sort of knife edge to the brush that you can use to build up these long flowing brush strokes. So that's what you see I'm doing here. I'm using a filbert brush, but I'm using that sort of knife edge of the brush to build up our fur texture. So this is what I'm starting to do here. We are in the detail phase. I have a rock solid underpainting, and it's just going to make it so much easier to start to build up that fur texture on top. I'm starting with my darker paints and then moving through to my lighter paints, like you can see here, using up those tiny little brush strokes that are going to build up that realistic fur texture. So the key to realistic fur is layering, because you have to remember that fur is built up of millions upon millions of teeny tiny little hairs that are all layered together. And you have to make sure that you are consciously layering those brush strokes in order to build up that realistic fur texture. So now I'm moving in with one of my new favorite brushes to use when it comes to fur detail, and that is a script brush. This guy here is basically, they've got long bristles, so they hold a lot of paint, which means that you're not constantly having to dip your brush in new paint to pick up more. You actually have a little bit of a sort of like built-in reservoir in those bristles. And it comes to a super, super fine point. So now with my lightest colors, I'm starting to pack in my tightest detail when it comes to my fur. Using teeny tiny little brush strokes, always paying attention to my reference photo to make sure that I know the direction that the fur is growing in, the length of the fur, the texture, all that good stuff. Nobody ever said painting fur was easy. But yeah, I'm working my way around my painting now, starting to build up that detail in the fur. Tons and tons of tiny little brush strokes, taking my time, and ultimately having fun with it, because that is the joy of painting. If you don't enjoy the process, what's the point? So give yourself the opportunity to really sink into this part of the process and just have fun with it. All right, so I'm pretty happy with the way the fur is looking so far. I know the color has a lot of improvements to be done, but I know once we move into the glazing phase, we can add all sorts of gorgeous color later. So now it's time to start working on the iris. Again, I'm starting with my darkest colors first. I want to reestablish some of those deep shadows that we're seeing here, and then starting to build up the detail in that eye. Now, eyes have some really, really cool textures in there. For the most part, they kind of act like a little bit of we'll say a bicycle wheel, where you have your center area and then all of the spokes are radiating outwards from it. That's kind of the same idea that we're going for here in the eye, where your pupil, that dark center, is going to be that center and all of the spokes are going to be radiating outwards from it. So typically what I'm doing here is I'm making a bunch of tiny, straight little brush strokes. Some have some wiggles and curves to them because it's just going to add a lot of really fun texture. But I'm basically creating all of these short little brush strokes that are radiating outwards from that center pupil. Again, starting with my darker paints first, and then as I'm moving through, grabbing lighter and lighter paint, starting to build up that texture and detail through those different layers. Eyes are one of my favorite things to paint, which should come as no surprise to you with how many eye paintings I have on this channel. But there's just so much opportunity for super cool colors, textures, light patterns, all that good stuff in eyes. And each one is unique and just so much fun to paint. So being able to just tightly focus on painting a single eye is honestly one of my favorite things because it's an absolute world of texture, of color, all that good stuff. And it's just, it's so much fun to be able to paint. So here you can see me again with that favorite script brush. And now I'm just going through and kind of adding those tightest bits of detail that I was craving. Adding a couple wiggly strokes in there just to make some interesting textures before going out and adding a little bit of detail to some of the areas around the eye. A couple sparkles of light that are really going to bring it to life. All right, it's time for the glazing phase. I set my painting aside for a few days to dry completely, and now I'm going in with some glazes. Glazes are just basically a tiny bit of transparent pigment to your paint in a medium that you're using in a thin wash to really transform things. So you can already see here with just a little bit of glazing how much more warmth and color is happening in that fur. And the beautiful part is because you're using transparent pigments, it's not obstructing any of that gorgeous detail that you packed in underneath. It's just adding a really gorgeous sort of crystalline wash of color on top. And now you can see I'm doing the same thing with the iris itself. I'm going in and putting a really beautiful blue glaze on top. And in just a few simple brush strokes, you can see what a crazy difference this makes for the color. And now into that wet glaze layer, I'm kind of pushing and pulling things a little bit more. So I'm tightening up that beautiful cast shadow I want on the eye. I'm adding some other colors to that blue, just so it's not just pure blue, and adding some really great color shifts. This is just going to help to make your eye look more realistic. So I'm popping in some browns, some purple tones, before going in and starting to build out that gorgeous highlight. Because up until this point, we haven't had any catch lights or bright highlights in our eyes. Because I like doing this into my glaze layer. I find it makes it look more natural. So that's what I'm doing here. I'm going in with some bright titanium white and starting to carve out that gorgeous highlight that is just going to bring everything together and add that sparkle of light and life that is going to completely transform your painting. And then finally, I'm just popping in a couple last minute brush strokes here and there wherever I think things need a little bit more sparkle. Don't forget to sign up for the full-length tutorial. It's completely free. There's a link in the description of this video where you can sign up. Thank you guys so much for watching. Let me know what tutorial you want to see next. Letting me know what you want to see is one of the best ways that I can help you guys as fellow artists. So please leave me a comment on the next tutorial that you want to see. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video.